Hi, this is Jeff Eager from Oregon Roundup, talking to you today briefly about a bill that the Democrats in the Oregon legislature plan to vote on today at 5 p.m., which would move the date of the referendum election on the $4.3 billion transportation tax hike from November of this year to May of this year. I wrote something about this earlier this week, but wanted to do a quick video to just kind of walk through the highlights of it, using some new to me technology here that'll allow you to kind of follow through the bill with me. There's been a lot of commentary on this bill, but I think the commentary misses just how extensively this bill would replace citizen input and process that is part of Oregon law as applied to ballot measures with the will of the legislature, and that will of the legislature is to increase taxes without suffering the electoral responsibility for doing so. That's the whole reason that Democrats, frankly, don't want to have this vote in November, because a bunch of them, including Governor Tina Kotek, will be on the ballot in November. This is a deeply unpopular tax hike. Senate President Rob Wagner recently admitted as much. He said that to OPB, is it political? For sure. He's referring to the bill that I'm going to go through here in a second. I don't think people want to see this on a November ballot. Wagner's office later sought to downplay his remarks, according to OPB. So this is a political move. We might expect politicians to do political things, but what the cost is here with this bill is that it actually deprives Oregonians of input to the ballot measure process that is typically guaranteed to them in Oregon law, and that this bill would remove entirely or significantly curtail. So without further ado, let's look at this bill. So this is Senate Bill 1599, downloaded it off of the Oregon Legislature website. You can see I've got my scrawlings and highlights on it from when I wrote the article last week. And there's really three ways that the bill reduces citizen input. So I'll go through this briefly here. There's kind of one category is an explanatory statement. So that's a 500-word description. It's supposed to be nonpartisan, unbiased description of the thing that voters are going to vote on, which in this case is to repeal the tax hike. That goes on the ballot. The explanatory statement goes on the ballot so that voters can theoretically read it and kind of understand what the thing would do when they're voting on it at home or wherever they might be voting. Under normal Oregon law, the explanatory statement is drafted by, and I'm going to refer to my other notes here, a committee made up of two proponents of the measure, two opponents of the measure, and one person appointed by the other four. So that fifth person typically in past practice has been someone from outside the legislature. The two proponents and the two opponents are frequently people from outside the legislature. You could imagine on a bill like this, or rather on a referendum like this, you might see people that actually work in maybe road maintenance, or people that don't want to pay the tax, etc. But the point is that these are supposed to be people from outside of state government in many cases who can help draft a truly unbiased explanatory statement. So what would SB 1599 do to that process? Well, gone is that citizen committee. It's just gone. And instead, you can see here a joint legislative committee created for the purpose of drafting the explanatory statement will draft the explanatory statement. So what does that mean? Joint legislative committee is going to be made up of legislators. So this committee that's going to be voting on this bill later this evening is a joint legislative committee. I suspect, but I don't know for sure, that it would be the same committee that would draft the explanatory statement. Now, the committee is dominated by Democrats. You'd expect them to have a majority on this committee. They have a majority on all committees. They have a supermajority in both houses of the legislature. But this committee in particular is made up of Democrats who, so far as the public record indicates, have not questioned the validity or the need for the tax hike to begin with. These are true believers. And leadership put them on this committee because they know how they're going to vote, and that's their expectation. So you replace a citizen committee of 5 with a legislative committee dominated by people who like the tax hike, that would be drafting this explanatory statement that's supposed to be unbiased and neutral. That's the first way that this bill undermines public input to this process that's normally guaranteed by Oregon law. Similarly, there's another document called the financial estimate that also appears on the ballot with in this case, the referendum to repeal the tax hike, that is to tell voters, this is what your vote would mean for the budget of the state of Oregon, the financial impact of that vote. Typically, under Oregon law, this is also made up of a committee consisting of the Secretary of State, the State Treasurer, and the Director of the Department of Administrative Services, and someone with expertise in local government finance. So it's a committee of 5, none of whom are legislators. Those folks that are within state government that would belong to this committee are all Democrats. But importantly, none of them have taken a vote on the gas tax. None of those folks have taken a vote. I don't think, as far as I know, any of them have taken a public position on it. And then you have this 5th member who would be someone who's knowledgeable in local government finance. That person would presumably be someone outside of state government, maybe like a finance director for a city or something like that. Those people are gone under this bill. That input is not going to be received under this bill. And instead, it would be drafted by, yes, a joint legislative committee, which, again, I assume is this same legislative committee that's going to be voting on this bill this evening, and is dominated by Democrats in the legislature who voted for the bill that raised taxes by $4.3 billion, and very likely agree with Senate President Rob Wagner that they don't want this thing on the ballot in November because it could cause problems for Democrats who are running for re-election, including Tina Kotek. Here's the financial estimate language right there. The last way, the third and final way in which citizen involvement is curtailed is in the submission of arguments. So we've all seen the voter pamphlet statements that come to our mailboxes around a little bit before the time ballots come out, and it says arguments in favor of a measure, arguments opposed. Well, there's a legal process that's supposed to happen to determine how those go in there, whether they can go into the voter pamphlet statement, etc. So typically, these arguments are due the 120th day before the election, right? So if the vote's going to be held in November, no problem. About 4 months before November, these arguments would be due. We're not close to that yet. The problem arises because the Democrats want to move this vote to May. And 120 days before the May 19th primary election was January 19th. So going on almost a month ago now would have been the deadline to submit arguments. So what does the bill say about when the new due date for submitting arguments would be? It doesn't say. It just says that the Secretary of State has to come up with a rule that just sets a deadline date. We don't know what that is. The legislators who are going to be voting on this thing on the committee tonight don't know what that deadline is going to be. To the degree it passes on to the House and Senate floors, those guys don't know what the deadline is going to be. And it And so they just don't know, but they're going to vote on it anyway. We'll see if the thing passes and if the Secretary of State comes up with a rule that says what the deadline is, what that is. But it's going to have to happen pretty fast because of the other deadlines that are in place for the Secretary of State to submit the stuff that needs to be printed for the ballots, quite frankly. And so we just don't know what that is, but what we do know is that ordinary procedure is not followed here. Oregonians and even the people voting on this bill don't know what the deadline for submitting arguments for the voter pamphlet statement is going to be, and it's probably going to be a very tight turnaround. So if you're someone in Oregon that wants to pay the fee to get an argument for or against the repeal of the tax into the voter pamphlet statement, it's going to be significantly harder if this bill becomes law and if the election is moved from November to May. Another thing that they do with this bill would do with the arguments is to exempt arguments filed with the Secretary of State from public inspection until the 4th business day after the deadline for arguments. That's this part here. So Oregon law in general, typically, in which would be replaced for the purpose of this one issue by this bill, says that arguments that are in favor or against a local government measure, not a state measure, a local government measure, are exempt from disclosure for 4 days after their deadline. So when they talk about disclosure, that is a public records request. So people like me submit public records requests to state agencies and say, hey, what public documents do you have? It's an important tool for people to understand what their state government's doing. I use it all the time to inform the reporting that I do here at Oregon Roundup. So this would be a brand new requirement that for the first time that I'm aware of would apply that exemption from public records requests to a state ballot measure for arguments for and against a state ballot measure, when in the past those have only applied to local government ballot measures. So you have these three axes on which this bill consistently erodes public comment, hearings. So that's the other thing I didn't mention is with the explanatory statement in the financial estimate, the Secretary of State's supposed to hold hearings on these, right? Because they're supposed to be fair. They're supposed to be neutral documents, neutral information. So the Secretary of State's supposed to hold hearings on these draft estimates and statements. The bill doesn't say what the Secretary of State's supposed to do with those hearings. Presumably he would try to still hold some, but the timeline is going to be super truncated under this bill because, again, all this procedural maneuvering and creating this whole new process that is different than what normally happens in Oregon law for ballot measures is intended for the primary purpose of allowing Democrats, including Tina Kotek, to avoid appearing on the same ballot as the tax hike that they all supported. So we're going to reduce public input so that Democrats don't suffer political pain, or maybe suffer less political pain for the votes that they took. That's the trade-off presented in this bill. Again, it's had a couple of hearings already in this brand new made-up committee, and the testimony's been overwhelmingly in opposition to SB 1599. They're still going to take a vote on it tonight. I think that very likely they will pass it, unless there's enough moderate Democrats in the legislature who tell their leadership, if this stinker makes it to the floor, I am not going to vote for it. Because the Democrats who are on this committee are true believers. They're not going to vote against it. They're fine with it. It's going to take moderate Democrats saying, you know what? I don't want to erode public process for my and Tina Kotek's clear, explicit, admitted partisan benefit. That's what they're voting on today in this committee. Anyway, they're voting tonight, starting at 5 p.m. You can watch it online. I appreciate you listening and watching, or whichever you're doing. Again, this is Jeff Eager with Oregon Roundup. Stay tuned.